Could the Denver Broncos' decision with Russell Wilson impact them from a business side from other players on the team? We'll analyze that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get Locked On Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts every single day, all year long. So do us a favor, hit that subscribe button or follow button down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team as we bring you all throughout a Rocky Mountain roller coaster of an offseason that is ahead. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. I mean, Sayre, we're really in the ripple effect portion of the post-Broncos Russell Wilson era, right? Obviously, we know that's going to happen officially March 13th. There's a little bit of ripple effects, right? You think about an earthquake, you think of the tsunami, like you have your initial waves, okay? And then you have your secondary waves, your follow-up waves here. This is going to be something that's really kind of following. And I know Broncos Country's like, all right, Russ is no longer on the team. Let's stop talking about him. We're not going to really focus so much on Russ, more so we're going to focus on how does this decision maybe impact the Broncos roster and their moves ahead. I think it's important to bring forth. And to be honest with you, Sayre, after it was announced that Russ was released and Russ released his statement, a lot of players on the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball came out to support Russ and express their gratitude for him. And you also got some very interesting messages as well. One of them coming from one of the wide receivers that he had a really great relationship with. Unfortunately, we never got to see too much of the connection between Russell Wilson and Tim Patrick. Will Tim Patrick return here in 2024? Now that Russ is no longer on the team, he definitely left some breadcrumbs out there that makes that a possibility.
Yeah, he posted on his Twitter page, like, see you soon, to Russell Wilson in his kind of farewell message, right? And I think that obviously got Broncos fans wondering, like, what does that mean? Do you mean you'll see him soon in free agency on your next team? Like, are you guys going on vacation together? What does that even mean? But Cody, I think obviously the ripple effects, like you mentioned, are massive. Like guys like Tim Patrick, much has been made about the fact that Russell Wilson will never play it down with the Denver Broncos on his 5-year, $243 million contract. Tim Patrick may never play it down for the Broncos on his 3-year, $34 million contract, right? Which is kind of crazy to think about with these last 2 years, lost seasons due to injury for Tim Patrick. He's an obvious salary cap cut candidate, right? At $9.5 million in savings with a nearly $16 million cap hit this coming season. We expect that the Broncos will not be keeping Tim Patrick at that number. Now, optimistically, we've been kind of throwing out there this idea, well, he could rip up the final year of that deal, re-sign with the Broncos. It makes a lot of sense for him to do so because the Broncos know his medical history. Like you kind of get the vibe that maybe he wants to come back and prove that the Broncos did the right thing by giving him that contract extension and do something on the field. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Cody, I can't help but wonder, there's such a divide with Broncos Country over, this, it's like a Sean Payton versus Russell Wilson or the Broncos versus Russell Wilson kind of thing. How much is that dripping into the locker room? And is that happening amongst the players? Is that level of toxicity? Are we seeing that in the Broncos locker room among a rift between the players and the Broncos and not just Russell Wilson versus Sean Payton in the eyes of the fans and media?
I think it's a great question to ask here, right? Because, players have the perception. And I've been, a believer of saying this, like, what precedent are you setting, right? And I think the moment that it all had come out that the Broncos had threatened to bench Russell Wilson after the Kansas City game, that kind of set a precedent like, oh, if the Broncos are going to do that to Russ, who is obviously a very accomplished quarterback, they will have no issue doing that to me, right? And I think players take note of that, right? And we'll dive into the business aspect of the NFL, but I think you look at where Tim is at. Tim's obviously a guy that I think you could tell the last 2 seasons, you look at the Broncos offense, you can't help but sit here and be like, man, what would the offense have looked like if Tim were there? If Tim was healthy, how would Denver have fared on third down? Because the prior years, Tim was one of the Broncos' best third down targets in terms of efficiency, the number of catches he had and how many of those catches moved the chains for a first down. Denver was lacking that in a big way the last 2 seasons without Timmy P. And I know for a fact, Sean Payton had massive plans for Tim inside of his offense in terms of the role that he was going to play. You were going to see a lot of Tim working inside as that big slot there. And we just, unfortunately, the Achilles injury, I just remember it sucked the wind out of the sails in Broncos country 2 years in a row for him. And so it's unfortunate. You mentioned the financial ramifications, his cap hit that he could account for, how much Denver can save. Like, ultimately, it boils down to this, Sayre. Denver has to become cap compliant by March 13th. And with this now development coming out, and obviously I think we can read into it, unfortunately, this is what we have to do. We have to pick up on the breadcrumbs. We look at a tweet that he puts out there, like, see you soon, brother. Like, that is more so along the lines like, hey, I am going to go wherever you go potentially. And I think maybe wherever Russell Wilson decides to sign, that may be a pitch factor here if the Broncos do in fact release Tim Patrick. But I think that's a realistic scenario that could be facing the Broncos and Tim Patrick coming up here in the next couple of days.
We certainly have come a long way, haven't we, from the perception that Russ was alienating everybody in the locker room with the office, the high knees on the airplane, the things that he was doing off the field that really a lot of people in the media would have had us believing, as I'm talking about Broncos country as a whole, would have had us all believing that nobody on the Denver Broncos liked Russell Wilson and that all those players came to his defense late in the 2022 season just as well, they were basically forced to do so. I mean, it's ridiculous to me, Cody. I think it's so crazy to see. Like, obviously, we know Russ is a good guy. Certainly better than me, having been around him, having chatted with him. But I get the vibe that Russ is genuinely a good guy. And I don't know that anyone would argue that, but people have questioned his genuineness. People question whether or not he had all the best motives in terms of coming to Denver and kind of dictating things the way that at least that's the perception, right? Yeah. So now we're seeing all these players come to his defense, and unlike 2022, former players coming to his defense, and guys saying like they're posting the fingers crossed thing as like, hey, we're tight, we're in this together. I don't know, Cody, what to even make of this. Like, does Tim Patrick, he's following Russell Wilson. Part of me is frustrated because I'm like, are we acting like 2013 Peyton Manning just got cut by the Denver Broncos? I mean, this is the frustrating thing. It's like, we want to see the Broncos turn this thing around, but when you have a locker room that's divided, maybe in some ways like this, it creates the perception that not everybody's on board, and maybe even retroactively not on board with turning this thing around unless there's certain specifications are met.
Well, there is one thing that we can continue to read into as well. There's a lot of talk going on right now about how this impacts one particular player, about whether or not he wants to return to Denver, even though he's coming off of a massive season. Has this impacted Courtland Sutton, maybe his desire to stay in Denver in 2024? Could he be a guy that maybe requests a trade at this juncture? That's something we'll dive deep into here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors, they've got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Once again, that's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode of the show is also brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And if you've ever had a frustrating ticket buying experience to go to one of your favorite sporting events, music events, or even just comedy events in your local areas. Let me tell you about the Game Time app because they alleviate a lot of the issues that you may have run into in the past. They have killer last minute deals with all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time, they take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Whether you're attending a Denver Nuggets game at Ball Arena, you want to see what your vantage point is going to be if all the action is Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets take the court, you can see your view exactly inside the Game Time app. They have all-in prices which show you your total up front so that you know you're getting a great deal before you even check out, and you can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Courtland Sutton's been sending out some cryptic messages on the social media this offseason, and we're going to break down what does that mean. Could he, along with Tim Patrick, be leaving the Denver Broncos this offseason? For Courtland Sutton, though, the Broncos would be getting some good value in return on top of the cap space. We're going to break that down on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, and we want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, especially throughout the offseason where there are going to be ripple effects every single day, pretty much. We're going to be riding this Broncos wave, Cody, for the next handful of months here leading into the NFL draft, and even after that point, discussing the future of this franchise. So lock in to Locked On Broncos every single day this offseason right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Cody, let's talk about, the flex on him, Cody. Cody's flexing on him today. If you're not watching on YouTube, by the way, you got to do it. You get to see the gun show. Look, Courtland Sutton is another player who kind of joined in. We saw Sutton, we saw Tim Patrick, and we saw Jerry Jeudy. They all posted the fingers crossed emoji. Although Courtland Sutton, I feel, Cody, had probably the biggest tribute to Russell Wilson on all of his social medias. Certainly he and Russ very close. Courtland played his best NFL season, in my opinion, along with Russell Wilson. Is this a deal breaker for Sutton, who's been with the team since 2018? He was drafted in the second round by Denver. He's been through quarterback after quarterback. Is he done with the Broncos after the Russell Wilson move?
It could be very well possible here, right? And I think we should probably bring to the forefront maybe some of the information as to why that could be the case. I think it is worth mentioning and worth noting that when the Broncos approached Russell Wilson after the team beat Kansas City and said, hey, we're going to bench you if you don't push your injury guarantee back, the only player that Russell Wilson told on the team was Courtland Sutton. Courtland knew it all along alongside Russ. And so there's a lot of conversation to be had there. Like, I think when you figure stuff like that out, and look, we covering the team, being in the locker room, like we never had any inkling that there was anything off about these guys during that time because Denver was riding a winning streak. Everything was great in the locker room, but we never knew all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, which a lot of these stories do happen and never get told, but it did get brought to the forefront in the final 2 weeks of the regular season in terms of what had come out about Denver's approach to it. And obviously it's like, who's in the right, who's in the wrong, where's the truth? It's somewhere in the middle. We're not going to dive deep into that. But Courtland is a player who knew what was going on all along. And I think we often at times see the NFL treat players like the business side, right? Rightfully so. They have every right to do so. And for the longest time, I think that there's always been this, like, players need to be loyal. And I think you have seen players be loyal, like take hometown discounts at times in certain situations. But I think in today's NFL, we are now seeing a transition from the loyalty aspect to I'm going to do what's best for me and from the business side and my family. And maybe at this point, Courtland, because Courtland's been through the whole wide variety of different QBs as well, right? Maybe at this point, he is saying like, all right, hey, you know what? Like, I don't want to be part of this. Like, it's tough though, Sayre. And the reason I say that is because you see NFL teams have tough decisions to make. And often at times somebody's going to get done wrong in the process, right? But it's up to the players at this point. Like, all right, hey, like we see that happening. They perceive that as being done wrong. They have every right to feel how they feel if they want to be out. So for me, I don't fault Sutton if he wants to get out, but he did tweet another one, right? So what does that mean, right? And I'm kind of irritated that we even have to like try to analyze this, but it's important. It's worth talking about. Does that mean another quarterback gone or just another year of whatever it may be? I'm not sure. But also going back to the Tim Patrick thing with Courtland, remember the Last Dance thing that came out last year with Tim on Instagram? Like, this is the same kind of thing that I'm getting the vibe with here with Courtland. And I do think because of his value here, I think maybe Courtland could ask to be traded.
I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, Cody. I'm with you completely on that. Look, Courtland Sutton is what, 27, 28 years old, right? He's obviously got 2 years left on his contract. Let's say Courtland gets one more shot at a big money deal in the NFL. You think he wants to mess around with whatever the Broncos are doing at quarterback again after spending 6 years already going through it? Like, you have to think about it from that perspective. And I think there is a kind of a catch-22 here, Cody. I'll go to bat as you said. For the player side, there's the business side for them. Like, they're considering, NFL teams always are looking out for the bottom line first and foremost. Loyalty is not really a thing in professional sports these days, unless you're Shohei Ohtani for the Dodgers, I guess, signing a lifetime deal. But I mean, with the NFL, the tough thing is like from a fan's perspective, I'm sitting here looking at Courtland Sutton and the Broncos. George Payton gave him a contract extension in season back in 2021, right? You get a contract extension from the Denver Broncos. They refuse to trade you. The refusal to trade Courtland Sutton is fascinating to me, because how would that be perceived by Sutton? Is that just simply like, no, you're not offering us good enough value? If the Broncos really didn't value Courtland Sutton, would they have extended him? Would they continually be refusing to trade him over, the last 2 years, really, or 18 months at the very least? To me, those are signs that, like, if I'm Courtland, I would be thinking to myself, man, like, this team really wants me to be part of what they're doing here. As frustrating as it may be to see the continual carousel at quarterback, I mean, yeah, Russ may be your good friend, but from organization standpoint, to me, Cody, it looks like the Broncos have done their part to make sure Courtland Sutton feels valued by the team. We're not trading you. We've given you the contract extension. We drafted you. And this spans how many different front office people, head coaches, offensive coordinators, wide receiver coaches. Like, if all these people have said, we want you to be part of this team, for him to be coming out there, and potentially giving the inkling like he wants to be done in Denver, that's very frustrating from a fan's perspective.
And I think that's a very valid point. I think you nailed it there too. And when you add something in the bio that says what's next, and like the banner is like an image that says pause, like, okay, I think it's just maybe evaluation season. Like, where is he at? Where's he thinking about that? I think you make some great points, because Denver, like, teams have called the Broncos and said, hey, we really want Courtland Sutton. And Denver's like, we're not trading him. We're not trading away Jerry Jeudy. They believe in him. And I can tell you this, Sean Payton loves Courtland Sutton, sees a lot in what he can do. He's a big part. Like, obviously, there's a reason why he was force-fed the ball this past season. Like, he was a big part of what Sean wants to accomplish. And so maybe at this point, because remember at the end of the year press conference where Sean was like, if you guys haven't, like, if players have any questions, reach out, like, come to the facility. We're going to be here. I wonder if there's a point now where maybe there is a conversation that, Sean and Courtland have, like, yeah, you have to, Sean and George and the Broncos, they made the tough decision to move on from Russell Wilson, right? 100%. They had every right to do just that. But how do you, in a time like this, provide maybe assurance to players that are maybe uncertain about maybe where their status lies in the future? That's where I think that this bridge has to come together at some point. I think there's a couple of options that this could lead into. Unfortunately, Sarah, I think it either, okay, Courtland, has a meeting with Sean and George, and they come to terms on where things are at, even though that maybe Courtland may feel a certain way about how the Broncos did Russell Wilson, right? But then also it's like, oh, what is the plan? Like, what is the vision here that's going to get me excited here about 2024? That conversation probably has to be had at some point if it hasn't already been had already. Like, we can see, like, there's conversations, there's things that go on with agents, with players all the time, but we don't know, like, if those conversations have happened or not, or what Denver's plan truly is. Or there's the other scenario where, hey, I could very well see NFL draft day, Denver wants to move up, or Denver wants to acquire another pick. Courtland coming off of a 10-touchdown season, the value is there for itself. You could very well see that happen here for the Broncos. And look, Broncos Country, we really want to hear from you on today's episode of Locked On Broncos. Do you feel like with this information that we've gotten about Courtland being the only player to know what was going on when Russ was going through the ordeal with the team, the NFLPA, do you feel like that's impacted maybe Courtland's desire to maybe want to stay in Denver? Let us know what you think, if that is or isn't the case here on Locked On Broncos. Another player who could be affected by the decision to move on from Russell Wilson as Denver looks to become cap compliant, will Garett Bolles return? And it's also weighing the fine line between the friendship and also the business side of the National Football League. You're going to get that on today's brand new episode Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. No cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Once again, that's robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Will Garett Bolles return this season to the Denver Broncos after the team moved on this week from Russell Wilson? Obviously, that's set to become official on the new league year, March 13th, 2:00 p.m. Mountain Time. And there's going to be a lot of decisions that are going to happen from a roster standpoint at this point. It could happen even the moment after we're done recording this episode here of the podcast. But Garett Bolles, could he be back into the mix here in 2024? We've weighed the options here, and we've talked about why we think that Denver should extend Garett, but does this whole development with how things have gone about with Russell Wilson, how Garett Bolles feels about Russ, does that impact his maybe ability to want to return here in 2024? And could he maybe be on his way out the door?
I think there's a lot of factors with Garett Bolles, Cody, that are very, very interesting. Number one, there's been rumors that he's already turned down contract restructure opportunities in the past. Like he wasn't interested in doing that, which leads me to believe that the Russell Wilson thing could be the final straw to break the camel's back, so to speak, right? I mean, for Garett Bolles, you're looking at a guy who's entering a contract year, a $20 million cap hit, $16 million non-guaranteed. Therefore, the Broncos can save $16 million by cutting or trading Garett Bolles. So that would get them basically cap compliant in one move. Also would open a big hole at the left tackle position. But did it rub Garett Bolles wrong that the Broncos released Russell Wilson, who he was arm in arm with basically after every game? I mean, if you search the Getty images, things like that, there's basically a picture of those two guys after every single game, win or loss, going off the field together. And Cody, I can't help but wonder, like, did it bother Garett Bolles that Mike McGlinchey came in last year and got the big money deal, got the captain, designation, things like that, when Bolles has been with this team since 2017? I mean, there's just so many different things there that lead me to wonder, like, is Garett now with Russ being let go, is he going to go to the front office and say, look, like, I'm not signing an extension here. I'm not taking a pay cut. Do with that information what you will. And in that case, I do think that the Broncos would have to move on.
Yeah, and I think in this situation as well, it's like it's all ultimately going to boil down to what Denver decides they want to do anyways, because he is under contract and they want to move on, they can do that. And I think if Garett wants to ask them, like, hey, just like release me, I'm sure that there's going to be conversations to be had there. I think so much of this too in the NFL is, are relationships repairable, right? And that's where I feel like it's so hard, because it's hard, like, from the personal side of things, to not take the business aspect personally, in terms of conversations that are being had about you. I know Garett Bolles apparently had told James Palmer of the NFL Network that he doesn't believe that the team is going to bring him back anyways. So if that's the case, like, what is the plan? And does the decision on Russell Wilson make it easier for Garett to just come out and say, hey, I already know you have hesitations, or maybe you're thinking about, like, not bringing me back? Or if Denver wants to extend him, like, does Garett want to be extended? Like, he says he wants to be a Bronco for life, but at the end of the day, players do value this. And this is where I think so much of the conversation on social media can be a little frustrating, Sayre's, like, being around these players and talking to these players, they want to feel valued. And I think in a lot of ways, like, Denver maintaining Garett Bolles, like giving him the contract extension, to me, kind of what you talked about with Tim and Court, says that the team does value him. And there's other things that go on that you're maybe wondering, you question whether or not that is the reality. these guys think about a lot, right? Because it's really their future. Their future is in the balance. And if there is a departure, it means, okay, what am I going to do? Where am I going to move my family to next? Like, there are a lot of external factors and worries that these guys deal with that we don't sometimes always factor in when we talk about it, or fans don't sometimes consider when we talk about roster structuring and putting the pieces together. For Garrett, I do feel like, though, this is going to be an interesting point. And was this the straw that maybe broke the camel's back when it comes to Garrett, if the team did have interest in maybe extending him?
I think it very well could be, right? And that's something that I think ultimately it harkens back to something that John Elway once said, Cody, like, we want players that want to be Denver Broncos. And I think that that's really the state that we're in. And remember when John Elway made that statement, there was a lot going on behind the scenes about guys that were wanting to go leave in free agency, get those big money deals and take care of themselves, which is totally understandable from the player's perspective. There was not much interest at the time, it felt like, in that Super Bowl 50 team really trying to run it back as much as possible. A lot of guys, and previously the Super Bowl 48 team, quite frankly. So that 2-year period, and not that the Broncos have reason right now, these players, it's like a lot of them are sick of losing, and they're sick of the change. They're sick of constantly having to reset the roster. They're sick of constantly having to, and I don't blame them for that, Cody. If you're stuck in a cycle of losing like that, the best thing for all parties involved may be just to go your separate ways and see if the grass is greener on the other side, and kind of mess around and find out, so to speak, right? With any of these situations, it's like, all right, we don't know if we're going to be better without you. You don't know if you're going to be better outside of Denver. We're going to find out, I guess. I mean, we're just going to have to, because we can't agree on the direction going forward. Like, Garett Bolles is going to be 32 this year, right? He's going to be 32. Like I said, with Courtland Sutton, and for sure with Tim Patrick, this upcoming contract that he gets after his deal with Denver is done, likely to be his last big one in the NFL, which means he's going to want to maximize value. Is he going to be able to maximize value in Denver, or is that going to better happen somewhere else? This whole fallout of Russell Wilson, the team releasing Russ, it's less about just the emotional aspect of it, Cody. And we know that not always the best decisions are made in the moment of emotion, right? But with Russ being gone now, I think it gives these guys the emotional permission to now go to the higher ups in the organization and say, look, like, I've been part of change here ever since I got here. We haven't won since I got here. I would rather go take my chances elsewhere. And I think they have every right to do that. And it extends not just to Garett Bolles, but guys like Justin Simmons on the defensive side as well. Like, we could see these guys all not maybe revolt, but certainly go to the front office with no guaranteed money left on their deals and say, I'd rather take my chances on another team.
And that is the dilemma, the duality that we run into with NFL free agency, roster construction. And it certainly is, I think, a very emotional type of discussion to be had. And look, I think the Broncos fan base is one of the most passionate fan bases in all of pro sports, right? And look, I know we can harp on, like, there's good commentary, there's bad commentary. The one thing that is the constant is the level of passion and the level of care that this fan base has. And look, there's a standard. And I think for the most part, like, there are a lot of fans here who want to see these players have success and, respect that they feel the way that they feel. I think another thing as well, it kind of plays into what you and I are going to talk about here on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos. Our good friends over there at the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast had an interesting mock draft that gave the Broncos a defensive player. I know you and I are going to go a little scorched earth on the fact that, hey, like, Denver's emphasis has to be offense the entire way in a 2024 NFL draft. And for all you everydayers out there, that's exactly what you can expect on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos. Sayre and myself will see you then for a brand new episode of the show.